Me as a person, I'm 38 years old. I started an internet startup in 1999. It was about nightlife in Germany. And after that, I opened a club and a restaurant for 6 years. And in 2009, I became the spokesman for the Berlin Club Commission. And I'm also still an entrepreneur, so I have two companies running, small companies, just 10 to 15 people. But yeah, we do still events, but it's I decided to step out of the nightlife music area, and now I'm basically more independent in how I speak, how I lobby for the scene without having like conflict of interests, having an own space or venues. And I'm also a networker, so I see my position mostly between decision makers, chamber of commerce, people, the public for sure, the press. And this picture is actually made in the committee for culture, where all the parties sit at one table, and I'm basically telling them what our position is in certain issues as well. And that's pretty new, because I mean, we couldn't imagine that we could sit in front of these politicians and discuss about club culture. Because when we started, club culture was basically something between table dance bars and red light districts and some shady businesses, and now it's one of the three things why people come to Berlin. And so this is a huge success in creating awareness about this scene in Berlin. To have a little insights into the history of clubbing in Berlin, actually we are very pleased to be a 24-hour city since 1949. And this guy on the left, his name is Heinz Sellmeier. He was the representative of bars and restaurants in Berlin after the war, and he had big issues, because there was a curfew 9 p.m. so nobody could, everybody had to leave bars and restaurants at 9 p.m. And so he went to the generals, to the Allies, and he was trying to, negotiate this, and he was not very successful with the French, not very successful with the British generals. But then he came to this guy, his name is General Frank Hawley, and he said, well, we really have to change this. And then he said, well, he talked to the other allies, and he doesn't think it's possible because they think it's a security issue. And then Heinz Sellmeier said, well, I think there is a security issue if so many Germans have to leave bars at 9 p.m. And so he said, okay, let's try this out for 2 weeks. And since then, we don't have a curfew. So sometimes it's just to have this middle people, the middleman, who are making this approach, and you have to find the right person, the decision maker, and then a lot of things can change. And that's what the story basically is about. And the second thing, what is very positive for Berlin when it comes to club culture, is that there was a fall of a wall in the middle of the city, and there was a lot of space. And the first thing would happen is that creative people occupied a lot of these spaces and set up clubs, illegal parties, and the government has different things to do. I mean, they had to build roads and try to make the whole infrastructure work, and they didn't really care about what happened there. That was a long time ago. So right now they catching up, and we have problems after problems since that. Yeah, to have this on a timeline. So in the early 90s, there was like a temporary usage of spaces. There were like illegal clubs. The Detroit techno was introduced to the city. Dimitri Hegemann was the one who first booked Detroit artists to Berlin. And yeah, a lot of squatted houses and a lot of alternative scenes were living in this little island, Berlin. 1995, there was like a continuation of commercialization of techno. The Love Parade happened. There was like a peak of 1.5 million visitors, and in that same time, a lot of clubs had to shut down. Raids happened almost every week, and that was the time when the Club Commission was founded, because we had to, tackle these issues, and we sat down with a politician and a senator at that time. He was a conservative politician. He was actually in the Kit Kat Club, the former Sage Club, sitting on a speaker, two security guys next to him. And then he was meeting those club owners, and then he said, well, I think you're business guys, and so the politicians don't talk to every single business guy, so if you have an opinion, if you want to change something, I think you have to form yourself to an organization. That's very German. So let's do this. And that's what actually the reason why the Club Commission was founded, because the politicians forced us basically to organize ourselves, to have a voice. Then 2002, 2003, a lot of great changes happened. A new underground culture developed. Clubs like Berghain, Bar 25, the Tresor moved from the former spot at Leipziger Platz to where it's now. So it's kind of left the street from the Love Parade and went into the clubs again. And nowadays there's like much more into internationalization. We have cooperation with the opera, the Staatsballet. There is like culture radio. Here you can see what happens with pop culture. So there's a lot of like mixing between the high culture and the subculture. And also we made it happen that some public spaces were also now given to clubs to run these venues there. We have Holzmarkt, the Yam, the club. But also a lot of outskirts clubs opened. Weide already closed again because it is a distance to go when you move out of the inner city. Sisyphos works very well. Heideglühen works very well. But that was also a new development, that clubs go out of the inner cities to the outskirts. And what also happens is that a lot of young upcoming promoters doing their stuff. They do pop-up events, spontaneous raves, open airs all over the city. And this is basically how it looked like, starting in Mitte, and then the scene mostly moved from Friedrichshain, Kreuzberg, Neukölln, and now drifting out of the inner cities. The result is that there are a lot of footprints left. We have now a huge fashion industry in the city, which also says they get inspiration from these night scenes and from people who are going out and dress there on their own. The fashion designers get their inspiration off. Then right now we have about 350 music venues and another 200 bars, music bars. So probably more than any other city in the world. And we have more than 450 collectives, people who are doing their own stuff regularly, irregularly, doing open airs, art exhibitions and stuff like that, just because they want to do something, be part of the public cultural society. And there is also a lot of money flooding into the city because we have a big startup industry, a lot of music-related companies were established in Berlin: SoundCloud, Ableton, Native Instruments, just to name 3 of them. And who also profits is the tourism. 35 million overnight stays, 2016. Actually, it started 12 years ago with 10 million overnight stays. So right now we have tripled the number in a few years. And and 28% of them are coming because of music and nightlife. And what also happens, the footprint of creatives, you can see in the city development. So this building is going to be built by former club owners of the Bar 25. It's a sustainable working and living space. These guys are the ones who are part of the Bar 25 crew, now opened up the Holzmarkt. And this is like one of the buildings there. It's a huge project, and you just see that people who are formerly, had their little music space and now are big developers in the city, which also is, a big change in the history of the city as well. The Times magazine called Berlin Europe's capital of cool, whatever that means. But you have this recognition. People talk about the city, and then it's the question: why is the city cool? It's because of shopping malls and hotels, or is it because people like these people who are running those spaces are actually the ones who are producing the content? And that is a good question, because if you talk about these creative industries, what exactly are the ones who are really providing something, giving something to the city? And from my perspective, you have like a range of commercial usage and more like exploitation of creativity, and you have the cultural side. And in the middle you have, from my point of view, you have the literature, performing arts, music and visual arts. And then as wider you go out of the circle, you see creative industries who are benefiting from this core. And that would, brings me to say, okay, we have to focus not in how can we scale up the fashion design industry. It's more like how can we focus on the core of creativity in the city, and how can we make it happen that people who are doing innovations are, are happy to live here and can afford to live here as well. If you have questions, just stop me. So the Guardian once said Berlin is the city of the unfinished, and I put a question mark behind this, because is Berlin still the city of the unfinished? I mean, if you compare it to other cities, it probably is. There are spots where you can still change things and create new things, but there are also areas which you think, okay, I mean, that's a train station over there on the left, or on the right. But it's, from a creative point, there's not a lot of things to do. I mean, you can dig a hole and put an urban garden somewhere there, but it's probably not allowed. So everything you see here is basically changing the city to a very regular city, which is not the city where people are attracted of and want to move. And this is actually the plan for the whole spray area made by the city, townhouses, hotels, businesses, whatever. Not the actual right now usage of this area, which is one of the USPs, when you call it like this, of the city. As I mentioned, there is a movement, the young underground in urban space, people who are just organize themselves in social media and start to do something, and they just go into parks, abandoned buildings, as far as there are some left, and set up their sound system and just do something. And I think that's a very big value for the city, that people do this without like a commercial interest, without like, how can I maximize my profits? I'm just doing this. Probably I probably put money in there actually. And this group of people, they also they appear in the media, and it says a Facebook party happened. That's actually a big question for me, what a Facebook party is. Maybe Mark Zuckerberg shows up. I don't know. But you can see how the reaction is. People didn't understand, why does it happen? How come that people, organize themselves and go to a park? Who is benefiting of this? So all these questions had to be tackled, and this is basically also something when the Club Commission comes in, then we set up roundtables, invited people who are doing those parties, and talked about police shutting down their parties, complaints by residents, and all these kind of issues, and we had several meetings, and it was already 3 years ago, and it turned out that we set up workshops for them, and we didn't make them in our office, we did them in the Chamber of Commerce, because we thought it's a good idea to go there where there is a big recognition of teaching people, and it was basically hacking the system. We use now their space to do workshops, and we had already 180 participants in these workshops. I did like 4 now, and it's a huge success, because what we do is we teach actually everybody how can you do your parties without being disturbed. Because there is no law which tells you cannot go to a park and celebrate his friends, because maybe you can go there with a guitar. Is it allowed? Is it not allowed? You can go there with your little boombox. Is it legal? Illegal? You can set up a sound system. Is this illegal? Question mark. Well, nobody can tell us, because they said, the governmental side or administration side told us, well, as long as there is no complaint, well, you can do whatever you want. And that was something we can work with, because we know, okay, when there's no littering and no complaints, then, well, we can just do it. And on the same side, we also tried to start a discussion with police and with everybody, invited them to those workshops and let them, talk about their point of view. And this created a big impact, because last year the new government of Berlin was constituted, and they set up their paper, what they're going to do for the next 5 years. And one of these sentences they put in was, we want to make it happen that non-commercial free open airs are possible in the city. So we don't have results yet, but that politicians take this group into their paper, besides all the other things, building roads and kindergartens and whatever they have to do, that's a pretty big success. And that worked because we started very much bottom up, and started to build a network, and then at the end we infiltrated the system and and tried to change things. On the right side, you see a lawyer who helps us. We also talked to the police, and the police actually were the ones who said we are very understanding, because 44% of the action we have to do in the summertime between, I think, 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. are because of not licensed noise. So music, basically. So they have 44% of what they do in some areas, some districts of the city are related to music. So they told us, if you can do something to lower this number, we are on your side, because we have different things to do. And that is actually a new way of thinking about it, to understand what the side of the police is, because they actually also have to execute, and they know what they have a number, and that's basically too high, and now they react how they react. They send out their troops, shut down the parties, and then they lower maybe their number. That's basically what they try to do. So the intermediate is very important to tackle those issues. We also got an offer after this by district. It's more in the outskirts of Berlin. It's Spandau, and they said, "Hey, we have this nice area here next to the river. We don't have a usage for it. Maybe you can set up something." And that was also for us a new model to use public space. Maybe it's not in the perfect area of the city, it's more in the outskirts, but for us very interesting to see that also some districts tell us, we want young people here, we have space here, let's do something together. So this is also something which comes out of being united, having like a contact person, having like basically an address where you can be contacted and addressed. So I talked a lot about the Club Commission, so I want to give you some insights about the organization. So founded 2001, has now 220 members. They're all club owners and promoters and people who are somehow want to support this scene. We also have, we see ourselves as a network and lobbyist, consultant and mediator. And we do stuff to somehow be somebody who can teach and bring information towards the scene, but in the same time to create awareness. And there are a lot of people you have to include when you talk about creating awareness. So this is like a stakeholder map. In the middle you have a music venue or a festival, whatever, and then you have real estate, you have residents, you have the public, the media. You have all your own workers you have to take care of. So many things you have to take care of, and at one point there was just too much to do, which is not related to actually running your space. And that's why an organization like the Club Commission is helping you to take care of different issues, because you cannot be expert in all that communication. And So this is just to make it clear that there are a lot of people involved. So we have three things we focus on. It's access, awareness, and education. Access because we think it's important that you have access to decision makers, to the media if you need them. We need to create awareness because this culture is still undervalued and people still think, well, maybe we have enough clubs, or maybe we have this, and there is not a sense for what is actually the impact of the scene for the city. So awareness is very, very important. And last but not least, education, because nobody really studied what they do. So you have to learn from each other. You have to have a network. You have to have people who tell you, give you insights and expertise, because the city is not as cheap anymore as it was. So if you make a mistake, it can be it can make you bankrupt, basically. So it's important to know what are like the big issues and what is legal, what is illegal, to make your decisions. And we see ourselves as an organization which is basically a framework for the scene. So we are not the ones who are dictating whatever you're gonna do. We just want to build you. We are like the toolbox you have access to. So we wanted you to create something, have freedom, and also the ability to develop new things. When people ask me, so what is this club culture? Is this creative economy? Is this creative industries, music industry? There are a lot of names for what we do, and we define ourselves as a scene economy, because I think that's the core of people who are actually working pretty well together, without like a little market, without any of these other big words you have to use. And what is the scene economy exactly? So in the middle of the scene economy is the artist. And then you can already see in music venues where food or motto parties or cheap drinks are in the center of why people are attracted, we wouldn't consider this as a scene economy. So the artist in the middle of our interest. And there is the booking market, the music sales market, and of course the events and concerts, the venues. And very much related to this is some software and hardware you have to use. You produce your music and to run your club. There is food and beverage for sure, and there is also a lot of marketing and PR into getting people into your spaces and into this business. So this is the scene economy, and to have a closer look to the venues we are talking about. So you have on a scale between mainstream and experimental, and also between like running this as a business or a non-profit. You have what we call in German the discotheque. It's basically a space which is very mainstream and very much business driven. So if somebody who runs a disco, you're looking for a space which you can hire for the next 10-15 years. You have several bars, you play the music which everybody likes, and then you're having then the only thing what you can kind of keep to maintain is to have like a VIP and somehow selecting issue that this vibe is somehow keeping up, that people think it's very special to go there. Then you have concert venues. They usually have the problem that they have a lot of technology, stages to finance. So if you want to run a event space, you have to look that you book bands and concerts which are filling the space, because you have to make money with it. But there are also some spaces we can afford to be more experimental as well. Then you have public funded venues. Many of them are in the outskirts, for young people, young kids who want to experiment with music somehow, but maybe it's also more like a social project. But some of them are very important also for the development of music. Then we have the spontaneous events, urban space, and somewhere in the middle we have a club, which is sometimes some days are more experimental, some days are more mainstream. That depends on on how you have to run your club to make as much money as needed. And we focus for the scene economy on these three kinds of venues. So to make it more clear, what's the difference between a club scene and a disco scene? So the club scene is focusing on on a niche market. You have selected music, mostly electro-punk, alternative music. You have this kind of a scene reputation you build up. You're acting more on an understatement. You have your own philosophy and attitude, how you run your space, what people are working there. So you have basically an idea of what you're doing. And what you're doing mostly for the city is creating social capital and subcultural capital, which means when you call something is cool, trendy, special, whatever, that's something which is creating your subcultural capital, your reputation in that. And this is not something you can, you cannot buy this creativity. It's something which you have to provide by people who are knowing what I do. And if you see on this flyer on this side, this is a Berghain flyer, but you can see they're not creating attention with mottos or whatever. They're creating attention with artists they're gonna book. That's their lineup. And the disco, sorry about this picture, but it's basically very much showing what I'm trying to say. Mainstream market, chart music, motto parties, mass media marketing, and the reason why you're doing this is to maximize your profits. So one is really performing creative work, and also creating creative work in some cases, and the other side is just an exploitation of creativity, as you can see. And you can also see this when you have a look at the audience. So I'm try to make also here a point in showing, okay, there are people who are much into music consuming, and some of them are really into the music, loving music, engaged in music, and first you have this person over here, the geek. It's somebody you find in record stores. Maybe buys their ticket early, like month before, knows exactly when you're like a tourist coming to a city, you know exactly where to go. You don't have to look in the local paper guides. So this is somebody who is very valuable for the city because they keep you up producing quality. Then you have somehow the hipsters, people who are maybe not so much into consuming music, because you can see them also at art galleries and opening restaurants and all kind of stuff. But they also have a sense for quality, and so they're also very valuable for the city as well. And then you have people like the easy jet setters, people who are pub crawling, best man parties. They are also consuming a lot of music, but they actually don't have an idea about what they're listening to. So some of them you maybe can teach, and maybe some of them are just from the countryside, and then they come to the city and then they learn. So that's the best case. But in many cases, they're also destroying what they find, because as you can see, the owner of a space is raising the rents because they see, oh, they make a lot of money here, and then the guys who are running the spaces, they basically change their whole program towards this kind of audience. And then I think still the worst audience you can have are the ones who are here for a conference, have a lot of money, and then they really change inner cities. So in many cities in the world, you can see inner cities run by champagne bars, all these kind of venues where not the music and the content is in focus, but to be there and to show yourself is basically the one who are destroying most of the culture you find. A lot of things happening in Berlin Mitte already. And in Prenzlauer Berg we're here as well. So also here we focus on these two audiences when we talk about the scene economy. So if we have complaints with neighbors and we're talking about people who are peeing their entrances and making a lot of noise and litters, you can be sure that most of them are not in this category. They're somewhere in this category. And that's why we say there is also something we can, when we represent nightlife and when we represent music, that we can also say we're not representing every bullshit which happens in the city. So some of the results of our works. So this event is run by the music board, and there is a music board because we were the ones who were campaigning for it. So for us, it was very important not to be just related to the Senate of Economy, which we were many years long. That they said, okay, music is economy. Pop music is economy, so you get your fundings and your connections only to the Senate. The other Senates for culture, Senate for city development, didn't want to talk to us. So the music board was established to build basically a cross innovation institution where you can see, okay, all the things which are related to pop music, which are Senate for Culture, which is city development and also economy, has to be addressed, and that's why we're very happy that we have this organization, which is also funded with 1.5 million. I think this year they get another money on top, and this is very special because not many cities have an institution like this. And the campaign over here was run by Native Instruments, and this was a fashion designer. So all kinds of different stakeholders in the city were supporting the idea of creating a music board and having more focus on the cultural side of music. We also did some demonstrations. You can see here the GEMA demonstrations 2012, or more than 200,000 petitioners signed a petition about the raising prices of this copyright organization, which wanted to raise the prices. We also did demonstration at the Easter Gallery, where a huge building was built. In this case, in this time, it was planned to be built, but they did. And we invited Roger Waters. He came to the wall, and was very supportive. And we also had David Hasselhoff, as you can see. I picked him up at the airport. You can see him here, and it's me on this side. So for us, that was also a way of, being not very serious about how we do it, but the point we wanted to make, it was very serious. So we got also all the headlines of the newspapers the next day, and everybody could see this. And this guy who was actually building this building, I don't have a picture of it because I don't want to promote it. He still has problems to rent it out or to sell his property. So I think everybody learned from this situation. We also did. We were kind of ironic when it came to show that the free open air scene is not just about littering and making noise and taking drugs. So what we did was also creating a rave where we picked up the garbage of the whole city, and we had huge music trucks, and it was a big party, and people were really confused standing next to the street and, what are you doing? Cleaning the street, but it's very loud. Do we like this? Do we don't? It was a very big success because it was dressing up funny, and we actually collected 30 big bags of garbage after 2 hours. So, just to show you a little bit how you can also create awareness and change things just by doing stuff with a lot of fun. This was last year. We had a table for 200 club owners set up in the Kraftwerk. Also the first time that so many people come together from the same branch and celebrated the 15 years of Clubcommission. We also do little things like this campaign for what we like in nightlife and what we don't. So the campaign was called Respect Club Culture, and you can see here my favorite one is no beer bikes. No pub crawls, but solid sound system, responsible use of drugs, selected music, that kind of things. You, as a venue, you also want to show that you're open for a diverse crowd and all that kind of stuff. This is Eberhard. He's doing tours through the city about club culture, and in this area there was a famous club before, and so he basically explains to people who are interested in the history of club culture of Berlin, why things are changing, how things are changing. It's also, I think, very important that you don't lose track on the changes which are made, and many of them were negative. The toolbox is a website we set up, ways of reducing litter and sound or noise. Many ideas collected together, building best practices, showing others how you can do it better. We also did this pantomimes, a little campaign in Kreuzberg for Design. Not to do it on the repressive way, sending out the police troops and shutting everything down, but going out there with like an artistic way and creating awareness on these issues, as you can see here. There's also set up a map. It's called the Clubkataster. It's actually directly a cooperation with the Senate for City Development. We put all the music venues on a map. And if you're building a house next to a music venue, you have to do the soundproof now. So this is also a big success when it comes to recognizing music venues in the city and make sure that they're not pushed out of an area. Since last year or 2 years, we also participate on the city tax, the tourism tax, which you have to pay if you're staying in a hotel in the city. And the city gains about 30 million euro a year by this tax. And we said, well, when we say that approximately 30% of the tourists are coming because of nightlife, then we need 10 million out of this. We didn't get 10 million, but we got about 250,000. And that's also a first step towards the 10 million. But you can see this is very special. No other city has this direct idea of, okay, you're creating content, there is income by tourism tax, and then we give it back somehow to the infrastructure. This is special for the city, and this is because you lobby for it and you have the right arguments. It was not automatically like this. The first idea of the politician was, well, we have 30 million income by tourists, so we have to give it back to the city marketing. And I said, no, not in the marketing, in the content. Damn. So yes, they learned kind of, and we're still working on the learning process of many politicians. Also creating awareness by our new series of Clubfilmnächte. It also happens this year again in November. We're having 7 clubs, 7 days, and in every club we show films about club culture, club history. We also invite the people who made these movies or played in those movies to discuss with the crowd. So it's also a very interesting way of dealing with club culture in the city. A new project, and I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Oh, I have still half an hour. Perfect. The creative footprint. So I talked in the beginning about footprints we left in the city. And the first idea I had when I talked to some people in the city was, how can we create awareness on every side of stakeholders? So on the side of the real estate industry as well on the politician sides, because the city changes and nobody really keeps track on how much space we lose, how much space we gain. There is like no calculation, there are no numbers. It's just like, okay, the caravan is moving on. It will be fine. They will find something else somewhere else. As you can see in London and New York and other cities, there is an end because the city has not space anymore and affordable space anymore. And so what we did was we had a look on some questions. So how can we shape this perception of the city? How can we be still a tourist attraction? How can we enhance also real estate in the same time? And how can we kind of make it happen that people still identify with their city? And a big question is, what we struggle right now is we try to conserve everything we have. So every little venue which is like threatened to shut down, we try to help. And we don't really have a. I don't know if it's a very authentic way of how a city develops, because conservation doesn't mean that this space is a well-run space with a good program. So how can we kind of measure this, and how can we make it happen that the city still can change? And we had a look at the carbon footprint. The carbon footprint is a model where you can calculate how much carbon you use, how much you hurt the environment by using a car, an airplane, or as a company, you pollute the environment. And so the same idea of keeping something in balance, if you chop down 3 trees, you have to plant them somewhere else, is something we wanted to use for the creative footprint. Because we didn't want to just calculate how much square meters we have, we had to look at 3 things. We had to look at the content, the framework conditions, and the space. And when we talk about the space, we talk about how is this social engaged, this space, is there like a high vibrancy in this area, what's the size of the space, is the space also a multidisciplined space, or is there just music, or is there also art and exhibitions and fashion or other things happening? And also, how old is the space? Because there's also a theory that if you have a space for 25 years, it's not getting more experimental. Many spaces, they just establish, and then they are still a cultural venue and still valuable for the city, but it's not like the area where new things happen. So building up a new space is always something where you can also restart and rethink and create something new. That's the space. The second part is the content. So we had a look at how many events happen in the space. How do they promote their events? Do they promote with artists or with mottos or cheap alcohol? So what is the attraction of the space? We had to look at the booking. Is it more like local or international bookings? So is it do you have like only the big huge entertainers coming into town and then they go to the next city, which doesn't make your city very special because they play in all the huge arenas in the world? Or is it a scene which is very, very local, very not really getting influenced from the outside? So is there a good mix, or is it the one or the other? Also the question, is it very mainstream, or is it also somehow diverse from what happens in the city? And last but not least, we also looked at is the artist who performs, does he really perform his own creative work, or is it just playing records of other people? Which is also a way of describing quality in a space. And when it comes to the framework conditions, there are the question is, how many venues are there in total? Which is also an interesting number, because if you go to Mumbai, you probably can count the music venues on 2 hands. If you go to Berlin, you are more than 500 right now. But also, is there government funding? Is there a way of having access to the administration? Is there like a music board, a club commission? Are there organizations which help you to connect to decision makers or not? So the result of Berlin is here. So we did the creative footprint for music. There is a way of probably doing the creative footprint for film and for performing art and visual art, but we focus on the music spaces. We collected 25,000 data items of 496 venues. We had, which I described, 15 parameters we had to look into. We had 30 music experts looking into the data, and 10 data researchers who all did all the fact checkings. And at the end, we have an overall score of 8.02 out of 10. It sounds pretty high, right? But the interesting part is when we calculate this creative footprint in 2 years again. if we are still in 8.02. So the comparison is now being made. We can now not only look at for the whole city, we can also go into to the spaces itself. So you can see, I don't know if you're familiar with those music spaces, but you can see the score of Ohm Club is 9.61, which has a very high content score, as well as the Berghain. But you also have, at the Haubentaucher, you have a very low content score, but a very high space score, because it's very much located in RAW area, very city-centered, very nice space, but it has very, let's say, not very ambitious music program, and that makes a lower score, and that's interesting to look at if you calculate this footprint. And this is the overall score. So you have the number of venues in the first row per district. You have the main scores and the content score and the space score. And surprisingly, Treptow is #1 district in Berlin, followed by Neukölln and Wedding. And as you can see, Kreuzberg and Friedrichshain have the most venues, but they lack in the content score. Have you questions to this already? What it helps is that now people maybe in Treptow, or maybe let's say Mitte or in Prenzlauer Berg, have a deeper look. Why are we lacking? What are these other districts doing better? Maybe when we do this, we are going now to New York with this program. So if you calculate this for New York, you can also see how is the difference between New York and Berlin, and maybe Berlin has a higher score. So decision makers from New York want to know how they make it, what's happening. So you can teach people, you can create a discussion, you create awareness, because many people may be not aware that nightlife is not nightlife and content is not content, and that's what we're trying to create with this score. And it's a very helpful tool for also people, activists, because then you have now a number to argue and not just a stomach feeling, oh, we shut down this club, and then everybody tells you, yeah, we will open somewhere else, don't worry. And I think now you have an overall view on the development, and that's very, very helpful. Not waking up 10 years later in a district you really liked to move, and then you see, well, everything changed to the bad. What else happened here in this area is that we have a look at, we can see that in some of these areas where you can see have been, we call experimental spaces, opened between 2006 and 2012. And if we put a heat map of refurbished buildings, so where they basically renovated the houses and the apartments, it were basically in the same areas where also experimental spaces were before. So the spaces which are opened in 2012 to 2016 disappeared, basically, as you can see. So everybody of us knew that experimental spaces attract people to move there, and then they start to refurbish the housings. But now we have numbers for it. And that's very helpful, because now you know that in areas which there's a lot of development, maybe you have to take money to keep those spaces open, and not just keep it as a by luck what happens over there. And this is the process we do this. So the first thing is we calculate the creative footprint. How do we do this? First of all, we do a data research on all the spaces we find on the internet. We work together with Resident Advisor, we work together with Facebook, so we use all the data we have. And then we have different meetups with experts in different city parts of the city, and they have a look on the questions of the content. And if you're somebody who is like no more than 20 venues and the program of 20 venues, you have an eye for, is this space promoting themselves with with artists, or are they just doing parties without any content. So that's something which you can see if you're like somebody who's around, who's like a promoter or a music journalist. So that's something we do. So when we calculate the footprint, we have several workshops where we want to introduce or tackle the problems which are appearing, and develop a strategy for the city. Then all the activities are planned. Then the changes are monitored, and then there's a follow-up, and then you have this calculation again. In the best case, you do this again. So there is a sustainability in how the city is developed, and that everybody is aware of the changes and not keeping it, by luck. So what are the learnings we have out of our work? So a successful scene economy needs, first of all, affordable space. It's very important that if you provide space, it needs to be affordable. And many cities try to create space, make very nice, finished, renovated buildings, and artists can move in, but they have to pay 15 euro per square meters. It's not very sustainable to be, you have to earn money in this, and you cannot experiment with new things. So affordable space is, from my point of view, the most important thing a city needs to have a successful scene economy. Second, you need as few regulation as possible. So start to discuss how cities treat their scenes is very valuable, because you can see they're all competing on a national scale, and if you see that all the major cities now changing their 24-hour law, then maybe you have to keep up, and that's what happens in the US right now, that they rethink and maybe also change this idea of reducing restrictions. In the city, you also need doers. You need people who are actually doing stuff and not just talk about it. And that's a big lack in many cities. Because when I'm invited to talk in those cities, I just came back from Lithuania, I had a very nice creative space and I discussed a lot, and a lot of questions happened, but the result is that I created a Facebook group, invited the people I met and tried to make them being active. So you need the doers. You need people who are somehow start. And when we talk about the creative scenes, it's not very easy because everybody's in their own bubble, and it's not comfortable to get out of this bubble and do stuff which maybe you don't like too much. You need unconventional ideas, and you need alternative tourism. So any tourism is not helpful, because if you have mass tourism, it basically destroys what you have built up. And that's something also the cities have to rethink, how they promote their city to the outside and who they invite to their city. So what can you do to support your scene economy? As I said, step out of your bubble. It's easy to say, but it's not getting cheaper. So if you have possibilities, buy now. Buy property, ask your dad, your brother who started a startup and is a millionaire now. Invest in property and rent it out for little money to creatives. Invest in content, not in furniture. So if you're creating a space, keep it how it is and focus on the art, or focus on the sound, but not on how nice the bar is made. It's not important. And that's something, I think, a philosophy which is still very much in common in Berlin. And that's very nice, that people are coming because of the content, not of the furniture. And you should do everything to prevent noise, because the city is getting closer and people are moving next to your spaces, and it's even if you have license, you need to have the tolerance of your surroundings. So everything you can do, and there are technologies and ways of doing this. Even if you do a free open air rave, you can do stuff to prevent noise. And last but not least, I also talked about this a lot, you need data and arguments. And it's not just about demonstrating and signing petitions, it's also about having facts. And that's something you also have to work on and create for your city. And we are also a music scene, and we are not just a bunch of people who are being conformed with everything. So if you're not speaking out and you're not opposing and protesting, nobody will do. So music has also be uncomfortable. You have to be you have to have constructive ideas to change things, and you have to talk to the Senate and to decision makers. But you also have to have a critical distance, because you're not their friends, you have your interests, and in some cases you also have to have this distance to go on the street and to protest against things. And that's why we are independent and not too close to governmental organizations. Yeah, and if somebody in this audience is from cities, here are also some tips. You have to monitor how your city changes and not, wake up 10 years too late. You don't have to overregulate your nightlife. You have to provide public space for all those grassroots projects. And you have to give music venues also a cultural recognition, which is happening now by law, that the Berghain has now this cultural status. But there are still laws which are really, if you're applying for license for a club, you're still on the same level as a table dance bar and a porn cinema in Berlin or in Germany. So the recognition is not there yet. And everybody who profits from your work, you also have to somehow involve, because the real estate is revaluing their property. You have a lot of businesses, tourism, taxes. Everybody is profiting, and you're the ones who have to leave the space. No, so everybody who is profiting, you also have to somehow involve. And I also would like to say this, because a lot of cities start now to put night mayors and night ambassadors and people like this into place. They're like people top down, you're now responsible for nightlife. It's a nice thing as long as they have a basis they can have, they can flourish and somehow have their own agenda in the opposition, basically. But if they don't, if they're just one person, they cannot tackle all these problems. I showed you the stakeholder map. It's not possible. So don't create a bottleneck position, because this can also hurt the city. If this person has to solve all the problems, it's not going to happen. And last but not least, here is a conference we do in November. You're very invited. Last time it happened in the Musik und Frieden and Watergate Club. We had about 500 participants from the nightlife, and these are the issues, some of the issues we are focusing on. And if you have time this year, November 9 to 11, Berlin, Stadt nach 8 is the name of the conference. Panels are also in English. Any questions? Yes. Yeah, it's not that easy to do, because a lot of the quality of the data is very important. So we have to check, where's the data from, who did it, who evaluated it. But what we did was we created like kind of a cookbook for a city. So if you're interested to do it, there is a way of doing it, and then we get the data, and then we calculate the footprint. But we also think it's I'm now going to New York, and I talked to people from Kickstarter, and it's also an idea to generate some money to crowdfunding, and then you do a big party to introduce the footprint, and if everybody buys a ticket with 30 euro or 50 euro, you have a big budget to do a campaign, to do workshops, and not just calculate the footprint and then nothing happens. And I think it's also very important to think about what is the aftermath of the calculation. So some budget would be helpful. But I also see that some cities which know they don't have a good footprint, not giving you the money by telling you, but I want to see the number first before you publish it. And so being independent from the city money, I think it's possible if you have an infrastructure on, doing crowdfunding and getting the money together. But I think it's a good start, because to have a number which says we suck helps to do any other actions, further actions. But the idea is actually really, if you go to a little Bavarian village and you have one music space, like I don't know, where like folk music is played live by people who create their own songs, probably this Bavarian village gets a good rating. So it's not about what kind of music is played, it's the question of, are people coming there because of the music, are these artists performing their own work, and etc., etc. So the questions we ask are very objective, and so a vision could be that every little village can create their own creative footprint. Please. Yeah, it does, and I don't think you solve any social issue by having a hip city. No, so I think city's gonna be more livable. People will enjoy more to go on the street, not being shot, or having a urban garden or a little club next to you or a little cafe and not a Starbucks. I mean, that's something which is very valuable and also attractive. But in the same time, there is also the need that you tackle the real problems, the social issue of a city, that people have enough income to pay their rents, and also that you somehow try to work on the real estate that they cannot, raise the prices in skyrocketing limits, and I don't have a solution for it, because but the creative footprint is doing one thing. They create awareness, and you can decide. So if you decide that this is a residential area, we don't want that any space opens there, then this is very helpful for you. If you decide that it's more valuable that we have a supermarket here than a music space, go for it, because people also have to buy their food and drinks to live, and not just having bars and cafes around their space where they live. But what I'm trying to say is that you have to be aware of it, and then you make a decision. And right now you don't have any numbers and have any awareness about it, so you cannot make a decision. And you know numbers, how many kindergartens you have in the city, and where you have to open them. But you don't have this for creative space, even though they're very important for what is the perception on the city. So either you can say, let's shut down all the creative spaces because we want to have to conserve the city as it is, and everybody can pay their rents and so forth. But then you don't have this development of the city, and you say, this is a very livable city, and I want to have that. So it's really a tough question. But I'm trying to not expose those numbers to real estate. So you saw those numbers of single venues. We don't publish them. It's just for you, because I don't want that speculators have a look at those numbers and then maybe do investments on that decision. But what I'm showing them to the public is patterns that you can see. This area is changing in the last years like this. Do you want it like that or not? Because if you talk to politicians and they tell you that this inner city is full of clubs, and you do a calculation and show them that this is all bullshit what they have, and none of them is really serious into music and art, then you're aware of it, and maybe then you try to change something. Learn from other cities how they change it. Okay, maybe there are investing programs supporting experimental spaces. Maybe they buy property, what they also did in Berlin, buy property and rent it out. In Amsterdam, they have this program. It's sort of called Broodplaatsen. They bought in the last 10 years property for 35 million euro and rent it out for creatives because they know that they cannot afford anymore to work and live in the city. We have a program in Vienna which is saying that if you build a new house in this area, you have to make it happen that the ground floor is rent out for maximum €5 per square meters, and you have to calculate this number into your whole building. So maybe the one who's on the top has to pay a lot more to afford the one in the ground floor, because we don't want only luxury boutiques in the ground floors. We also want maybe a nice cafe which which needs a very low rent. That are some programs we can help to sustain, but as I said, in not tackling the whole social issues of the city. Is there one more question?
So the score, sorry. I was just wondering, so the score is actually to help promote urbanization, not gentrification. It's also
Exactly.
to remove that idea of that we're aiming for clubs that are really blatantly there for the purpose of selling and promoting gentrification, and taking into consideration the idea that these small venues that are made with the idea of taste and music bring people together and create something that then Starbucks and other places want to come into because they just see numbers, and kind of moving away from the numbers to give to real estate to then just show that it is successful. These places are successful and they need the funding to continue to develop and grow them and make urbanization happen in the area, kind of like keeping that place whole in the way it is and just bettering it and creating it into something
Yeah.
more
Yeah. What happens if you have an affordable space? You have two things. First of all, you have a place where also young upcoming artists have a place to perform, because the owner can afford to open up maybe a day or maybe some of his slots for unknown artists, because he can afford it. It's not like I have to book this big artist to fill up my my space. Secondly, you also, if you have a lower cost, you don't have the pressure to raise your entrance fees and your prices for drinks, and that also gives the opportunity for maybe alternative groups or alternative audiences to participate. So students are having like a limited amount of money to spend into nightlife, and everybody costs like $20 entry fee, and you're already spend this on this one venue, and that's what I'm saying. And so if you keep these numbers low, there is a possibility that things are developing. It's not covering the costs for every artist where they have to live. Definitely not. So there needs to be a government program to tackle this issue. It doesn't also tackle the problem that you need a working space, a rehearsal studio. But we also thought about this, but there is not a way of creating an index for this, because we don't have the numbers. If we do this footprint for Mumbai, believe me, it's not possible to find out where all the rehearsal studios of bands are, because there is not they don't promote their venues publicly, and then we cannot calculate it. So we focus on the numbers we can have, which are really facts we can build on, but then the workshops will show different issues as well. We go from there, and then we can see, okay, but we also need a program to afford housing. We can build on this, but you have to start somewhere, and that's the number which compares cities and take it from there, basically.
Hello, Francesca.
Yeah, it will be an adventure because what we did was we have already access to the city, so we have this site already made. But for us, it's important to find out who are like key persons, stakeholders in the music scenes. I will arrive on Saturday. I'm already on a panel in Bushwick, and then from there, I'm 1 week and have like I think 20 or 25 meetings. So what we do, we are a group, but what we want to meet as many people as possible to understand who is important to be involved, and that's the way we do it, because we can generate a lot of data from the internet, and then we have some facts which are shown, but then we have to do those meetups with experts, and we have to find out, are we doing this in every district? Are we doing this for every music scene? How many meetings do we have to do? How many people do we have to involve? That's something we will find out. But in a number, it's not more than Berlin. In the total number, it's a big city, but the number of venues is way lower than we have in Berlin. So I'm confident. Okay.